this is the Black Aesthetic. Just to do a quick round of introductions, my name is Elisa Michelle. I'll be the moderator for today's panel. I am an artist and a social practitioner. I work with multimedia arts, and I'm a resident Boston young girl. So I got into a lot of the work that I do from reading comics and watching anime growing up, and that opportunity for escapism and thinking about how to apply that to Afrofuturistic applications has been a big part of my career. So with that, I'd like to welcome Ronald Wimberly. Hi. As per the bio says.
I mean, I can just say it real quick. The bio's probably awful. I'm a cartoonist. I do some writing, doing some screenwriting, filmmaking. Yeah, that's the name. Cartoonist, so you write and you draw your language.
I feel like the bio says a little bit more, so I'm gonna just add to it. We can be a little shy. We want to like know ourselves.
It sounds kind of.
Ronald Wimberly. I'll do it in my Diane Sawyer voice. Ronald Wimberly is an artist who works primarily in design and narrative. He's also an accomplished cartoonist, having designed several graphic novels, as well as shorter works for DC and Vertigo, Nike, Marvel, Hill and Wang, and Dark Horse. His most recent works of note include the critically acclaimed Prince of Cats and the cartoon essay Lighten Up for the Nib on Medium. He's exhibited in New York, Tokyo, and Paris. Ronald was the 2016 Columbus Comics resident and two-time resident cartoonist of the Angoulême Maison des Auteurs. How's that?
Nice. Thank you for doing that. So we know more about you and your work. Thank you, Ron.
And I would also like to present Merchie Frazier. Would you like to present yourself, or should I do
I can. First of all, very delighted to be here and have you all as audience. And I'm Merchie Frazier, a visual activist, artist, poet, historian, looking at the opportunity to give a mirror and reflection of my community and in the work that I do in social justice and reparative justice, and hopefully have accomplished something within that realm that I can leave on the earth. I've been working as an activist since I was 12 years old. As an artist, though, more in the vein of like 30 years, and participate in the discourse that art gives us the platform to do. So,
Where are you based? Where are you based?
oh, I'm based in Boston right now. I hail from Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, and my work is in private collections in the Smithsonian, and most recently at Minneapolis Institute of Art, with one of my works being purchased to dedicate to the memory of George Floyd, and the Dallas Museum and some other places. But I am an AMARP artist, also African American Master Artist in Residency, like my brother in the back, Shane Justice, and have worked with Kagan to do animated stories of Black Heritage Trail with the high school students that we have come to us. So that's kind of some of it, and that's good.
And as director of the African American History Museum.
Oh, yeah.
Just a lot of these things.
Director of Education and Interpretation for the Museum of African American History, Boston, Nantucket, and also Director of Creative Engagement for the Transformative Action Project, working under Northeast Public Health Advocacy Institute to have mindful and art practice with survivors of trauma, crisis, and violence.
What's your medium? What's your medium? What medium do you like to work with?
Various mediums, including metals, holography, life-size holograms, fiber, and anything that can really be treated as transparencies or ethereal leanings.
Thank you.
There was a question, I mean, right off the top, I'm curious about like, Luis Kamnitzer, the artist there was a question, in the medium. It was interesting how you approached it. It's like, he was talking about how in his work, he does some like, comes from like a rock tradition in the 60s. But he was like, yeah, well, you know, as an artist, he started out as a printmaker, but then, you know, as he pursued his practice through the years, it became less and less a relevant sort of thing to, you know, it's not, I'm a printmaker, it's like, no, it's working in whatever the medium, he's bringing that sort of the ideas to bear and the inquiries into whatever it is the medium may shape his approach, but maybe even like what he needs to do may affect like which medium, or it might just be the materials you have available. I think comics for me, it's like I have the materials, so like that's why.
The Western world brings that word art into play, but these were systems of images that were evolutionary in Black culture, that go from the east in northern Africa across the Sahara Desert to the west of Africa, and then become inculcated in those societies and in cultures with the different language frames that describe them in ways that make art as a memory and as a part of the culture, as members of the society. If we look at the mass cultures and we look at what has, for instance, in the systems of the Dogon, who are people who have been known to have come from Egypt across the Sahara Desert into West Africa, and we look at their ability to be one with nature and universal things, and to understand the spiral and the checkerboard as evidence of life and symbols of life and death, and life as it is seeded, male and female, as they delineate these processes of life. It becomes art. It becomes celebrated. It becomes festival. It becomes in tune with the seasons. It becomes the idea of being able to look at the cosmos with the naked eye and identify things. Those, for me, set the course of what you call Black joy, because it is, being able to participate in a universe that is as vast as this one is, and have a human connection to it. And how that manifests itself in images becomes this participation in the aesthetic of being. I think more than the political, as you were saying, the political binary black-white piece that becomes this kind of artificial labeling that we now use as the thing. But beyond that, being able to be in tune with nature. We don't often think of Black art as being part of what is expression about nature. The Yoruba in the pantheon of deities of the Gelede and the Egungun sculptures that are amassed, that are danced and performed, that you don't see the human form at all. You see these appendages of cloth that are flying out and in motion and bringing the ancestors and regarding nature to the community for celebrations of harvest and birth and all of that as an active participation of community engagement with the ancestors. That this is, and now, it's taken by the Western world and extracted and put into museums.
It has to destroy its function. That's what Western museums were.
Exactly. And becoming things of curiosity, as they used to have curiosity rooms. Now we call them museums. But looking at that as a member of society, a mask, its function, some of them destroyed at the end of 20 years, and why that is done, and why, there are religious practices associated with these items that are now called in the Western world art. So for me, that is the, I think, privilege we have in terms of understanding intrinsically that definitions for art exist in a Western canon, but we can absolutely redefine that and reimagine that and look at it as an opportunity to make our world reflect what not only is ancient, but what is present and that which will be future as we consider these possibilities on different planes and different complex levels of being active. So when an artist like Mojo from Nigeria has a showing at the Davis Museum, and he is listed on ticker tape kind of paper that goes out of the room of the museum into the halls and around of the actual objects that have been taken by places like the British Museum, these objects that were members of community. And he's saying that this flowing data sheet says that these members need to be put back into their place. Yeah. He is establishing that this is living evidence of Blackness or of Africanness or of memory, of remembering, the parts that disconnected some kind of way. My art is called Save Me From Amnesia, and that's what I try to do as I walk every day. I don't care what genre it's in. It's that active, live responsibility to keep this conversation going until we have redefined and made our own, as you will, paradigm. And I think that is where your art is definitely headed, and others like you, and in this century, as this redefining. I think Daniel's work also redefines filmmaking and mask making as mask making becomes personal.
My work is mass media. So that's one way I think it's, if you don't mind.
No, please.
My work is mass media, so it kind of defies this, it's funny to have a conversation about the arts. And I think it's very important to kind of because I think in our conversation, we may just take for granted a rudimentary understanding of so if I were to say art, I could mean just the practice of making pictures. But as you're speaking now, you're speaking about art as an institution, but you're also speaking about art and you're using the same word. And I think, I don't know, I dig it. But I also understand it could be confusing maybe to the uninitiated. Maybe all of us here have enough leisure time to read it, whatever. But one of the things particularly around that is, so since I work in reproduction, my work is work to be used, in the same way as the mask or whatever. It's my work, you should have it, it should get old, maybe you throw it away, maybe you get a new copy. It's not the sacred item that you would have in a museum, which is its value comes from the sacred quality of its scarcity, and also it's the fact that it's just in a museum, or just it's been minted culturally, right? by the market maybe, or maybe by an artist who went to Yale. So they have the ability to create value, the value of my work comes from somewhere else. And the value, and you see in comic book art, the value of art that becomes massive is when it becomes a historical object. And when it's in a museum, guess what? It has no function. A Jack Kirby page in a museum does not function as comic book art anymore. It is an artifact, right? And when you're talking about that, I think we have within Western art history, we have precedent for art, because when we're talking about art, we're literally even just talking about, it's funny because the construction of Blackness happens around the same time as the construction of art and art history, institutional art. So when you're talking about that, I'm thinking about wow, okay, so, and it's funny because Duchamp was making a comment about this at the same time, a lot of this exploration into, African indigenous art. And it's I don't see much difference, him putting a urinal in a gallery and calling it a fountain to like what others would do. They would take a mask out of its context and put it in a museum, right, and call it art. It's like, no, this was a tool, this was a ritual, this was a, this had meaning somewhere else. And I feel like that's something that's interesting as Black artists, maybe something we have a very unique gift to the Western world to kind of consider these things, particularly more and more as art becomes, functional as protest, right? Because one of the paradoxes, I think, in art as protest is like, if in the Western world, mostly what art is like, or how it has functioned is the destruction of the meaning of a thing, or like the aestheticizing of a thing, then how can you produce something that's supposed to have a explicit function, which is liberation, right? And one of like the difficulties I think of being an artist in that institution is maintaining, say if that is the function of your work, maintaining your practice and that function while at the same time like surviving within that institution. This is I didn't mean to go there, but that's an interesting.
I think that's a great question I want to bring up is that how do you all survive in these institutions? How do you break through the kind of gatekeeping that you're talking about? What are your strategies and recommendations? And then we'll open it up to...
I think it has to do with the question of value that Ronald brings up in terms of what are you reflecting in the syncretization of what is Western culture, and then which is that which you define as your own culture, and the strength of that. What has been some of our predecessors whose shoulders we stand on, like even Edmonia Lewis in the 19th century, who's a sculptor, a woman sculptor, who decides to expatriate to Rome to bring her work in a country that's not invested in slavery. And as she produces her images and the physiognomy of her images, she's concerned with the time of how people look at these visual objects and either accept them or reject them. And she is of Haitian and indigenous extract and Ojibwa extract and African American, and has learned from her people, because she was orphaned so early, who are her mother's people who are indigenous, to really understand nature. Her name is Wildfire, her other name is Wildfire. And as she looks at the examination of physical features from the neoclassical art world, she is developing these sculptures that somehow kind of go between Black physiognomy and that of European light features. And it's intentional, so that people will buy her work and then grapple with her message. So I think the intentionality we have in making people critically be confronted by is a process of working within and without. And those of us who resist the whole thing can create a whole new paradigm of work. And I think more of it has to do with our belief in it to be effective and to be significant. I'm not saying that we have, the strike against the institutional powers to be able to always manifest it in those spaces, but we can create our own. I look at Gaijun comics and the aesthetic that when Marvel wasn't hiring graphic artists who can bring the story and be animators, they made their own fraternity, what I call a fraternity, of artists who could construct images in their own right, who could deal with what we have is in Western culture, the 35 stories of Greek tragedy and and comedy, who could work within that box and create their own stories, and elevated respect for self-publishing. They elevated the respect, and then the world catches on, but they elevate this comic genre as legitimate and not controlled by the institutional ones that are producing Superman, Wonder Woman, Archie comics. All of those are very valuable, as you said, that become the institutionally certified and are worth big bucks. We have a collector in the room right here. Okay. So when
Also
we
right
talk
here,
about okay, and so when we talk about this ability to explore the possibilities, where I think our greatest work is to inform and help our young people to understand that they're armed with the stuff they need to be able to create new possibilities, to walk out there on the edge, like people like Romy Bearden and the creation of Spiral as an organization and collective of artists and writers stake their claim, and then Obasi and Weusi and Afrocobra, they made institutions now that become over time the product of their mission. So I think we can be institutional creators, but we got to be willing to stick with it. I think that this opportunity to defy that art has to be deconstruction in order to be valuable is a Western thought. What is the thought of the African in creating art? What is the thought of other than that to be?
And what about your thought, Ron?
I wanted to jump back just a little bit. I was going to say it's a very simple, not an answer, but maybe it's a question, which is when we were talking about I guess pain and struggle versus joy. And I was like, I don't know if I do see commercially the value in struggle narratives, but I think if I look at actual production, like we've just been synthesizing it from the beginning, over here, I think just, from, I don't know, like slave calling, call and response, like the blues, like rock and roll, jazz. It's like you listen to like you're gonna get foibles of famous. You'll be like, okay, well this is actually a bop, but it's also kind of pretty heavy. You know what I mean? Like at the same time. You know what I mean? Like the way some of our greatest performers can turn a sound that abstractly sounds like a lot of pain into like something that we can kind of groove to is it just seems like I guess the question would be like, we're doing it, I think maybe that is part of the aesthetic, is like we're doing both of those things at once, all the time, and I think it's been something the world has recognized,
I think that you bring up a great point. I was listening to a documentary on YouTube of John Baptista and at the Aspen Jazz Festival. This was before he won the awards, and then another YouTube with he and Wynton Marsalis, and how John Baptiste with his what do you call that piano thing he has? What's that? Well, anyway, he was playing it. It's an instrument. Yes, it is. Okay, so but it mimics the piano. And as he began to respond to this interviewer's questions about bebop, Scott Joplin, Louis Armstrong, the blues and it as an idiom, and he could flex between the kinds of classifications of this music that were Black generated from Black genius that informed the music world on the edges and then became certified in the music world as they commodified it. It was to witness this ability of the agility of Black aesthetic to look at how agile it can rock it one way, and then you have the Jimi Hendrix, and he's playing this, and he's playing Jimi, and then he goes right into Scott Joplin. Okay, and so how this information affects a world, and then presents itself as the definer of what we consume across the board, for me, is saying something about Black design, Black deep patterning in the mind, and the ability to fabricate and manipulate things that seem almost impossible. It's like an invisibility that you make visible. It's like, just like Michael Jordan with the basketball. We hadn't seen anybody do that, like on a national scale, television, being able to, I know street ballers were doing it, but he was elevating what you can do with that ball with his genius and his defiance of physics in a realm that hadn't been witnessed before, right? And so it then makes for what we're looking at the Celtics doing today. What I'm saying is that Black aesthetics and beauty in any phase and activity and phenomena we participate in has this energy that is from that well of pain, because we can shoot it up to joy even further. And to realize that if we impart that to our young people, some of them realize it, some of them don't. But if we impart that to our young people, we are making for a generation that is limitless. And that's what I see as the Afrofuturism that is important. And so, our young people on the Black Heritage Trail are involved with Kagan to animate the stories of those who came before. It's about the principle of being able to press whether there's this obstacle or not. We're gonna triumph, and to impart that to them, that no situation is untenable, is what I think we owe to them within this consideration of an aesthetic. Don Stoll said to me, he was a local architect, awarded Black design architect. He did a police station over here, did many, many buildings. He was even in this project that we had for Mozambique to lift slave narratives, to memorialize those who had been lost in the Middle Passage, to have a space on Spectacle Island to do that. Mozambique as a sister city, sister country, but they were ready to go with their memorial because they had the resources, as you were talking about resources. They had the capability and resources of their Minister of Culture to say, let's go. Let's create these memorials. Boston, they had to go through this process of legislature and all of that. But Don Stoll was the designer of what this would look like. And he put an upside down pyramid on a ball. This is a building that would be in the water with passageways through it where you could see art reflecting from the water of major African-American artists. And his conception of that was extraordinary. It's only on video right now because we couldn't get, it was a 9-year process. But what I asked him in the space of him being accessible one day was, what did he think about the Black aesthetic? His answer to me was, it doesn't exist. And so I said, are you sure? I was like, oh, I was on what they call in the 19th century crestfallen. So, but he said that it is an aesthetic that has always been. That it is not necessarily to quantify it. It is, it exists, and it will continue. And that's where you anchor what becomes called art in. So I said, oh, okay.
That in a way it reflects back on the notion of, you know, this is maybe dangerous for me to say. Well, it's a dangerous idea. It's a dangerous idea. No, but like this is a dangerous idea in a political sense, right? I think so. I think it is because that statement reflects on the nature. One of the things that I think about the black politic as well, which is like its use and its function is born from a place, you know, like the construction of race is, you know, is pernicious, right? And the black politic was something that kind of, it's like jujitsu, right? It's like, okay, taking the force and the speed of something and using it to destroy that thing or to like kind of break that thing. But like ultimately, in as much as like a black aesthetic doesn't exist, would mean in as much as like a black politic would no longer be useful and therefore also would not exist, right? It's a very, I say it's dangerous because I think it could be easily misconstrued.
Yes, I agree.
But like, yeah, it's in as much as saying like, yeah, whiteness constructed blackness, right? It's like you could say something like that, and it's like, whoa, okay, what do you mean by that? And it's like, you know, like I said before, like you had to create a category of degradation. Like, it's like when you think about this, you know, democracy, right? Like within democracy, you have a demos, right? Which means that within that, then there is sub-demos. So like there's something that is not participating in democracy, but maybe, yeah, to construct the human, then also means like, well, then what is the subhuman, right? In order to have the human, you have to have the subhuman. So it's like, there are a lot of ideas I think that can become kind of, you know, philosophical, whatever, you know, and as long as we're in a space where it's like, okay, we're dealing with these ideas, and it's like, it's safe, but like things get out, and then people don't understand, and like they want to, you know, it's like, no, we're having an inquiry so that we can get free, right? Or that we can explore these things and like how they function. Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I would disagree, but like that is an antagonistic statement to the actual formation of these categories. Right?
Yeah, and I agree with you because when you think about what really creates blackness, since you bring that up, we're talking about melanin in one sense and creating this physical, visible color. But when we're talking about political ideas of blackness, we're speaking to a larger realm of philosophical thinking, the paradigm that's created by the construction of race, and what that means and its impact in the world, particularly engendered by the complexity of slavery and its degradation of melanated people. And how in the 21st century you're looking at BIPOC, we're looking at all these other categories of what is not binary anymore when you think like that. And then the movement, nothing is the only constant I think really here is change. Nothing is really static. And so as time moves on, maybe there will be this time where there isn't the black extent and the necessity of having to single it out. But right now,
I mean, I think it's a historical reality right now. Just for the simple fact that, like, okay, at some point in time, people started to either because of how, you know, like what makes a porter from California, how can they relate to someone who's a sharecropper in, you know, North Carolina or something? Like, how can they relate to each other? Like, that's where the black politic comes from, right? Like, this is where, like, in terms of an organizing, right? In terms of seeing ourselves, in terms of like, okay, well, who's catching heat from who, right? Like, that's how it's super useful. Like, I mean, I don't speak the same way that you do. I have a different economic situation than you. I got like a whole bunch, like I might think different things religious, like, you know, Christian, but you're Muslim, whatever. So, but like, how do we, like, what category do we fit under? How do we unify? And I think, well, born from that, then like, what is the aesthetic language that's born from that? And like, historically, maybe something changes. That at one point, there were various ethnic groups in like the Fertile Crescent who maybe saw themselves as one, but some material thing changes, and now they have different things. They're producing different aesthetics. Maybe they don't even see each other as one people anymore. Maybe something happens when they come together and they see themselves as a people again. So I think historically, sorry.
No,
Yes.
I want to keep this going, but we're out of time. I would love to keep this conversation going, but we didn't even have time to really open to the audience. But if anyone has any quick questions, but let's first just give our panelists a round of applause. Fantastic. No, thank you all very much for attending, and and then the minute that we have, if there's any questions, let's put it up there.
You all were actually getting to the part of the conversation that I had in my mind. It's like, is it necessary to say Black aesthetic anymore? But historically speaking and culturally speaking, where we are today, it is still necessary because it is still a part of a humanness that is being neglected, and it needs to have that space and that energy to be able to be put in the forefront and not forgotten and not ignored and not blended in such that it doesn't exist and it has to be valued and stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, what else do you think?
Okay,
Well,
we put on the chair, right?
But I feel like there's that burden of just being the artist and being, so who happens to be, like you were saying, Mel, who happens to be Black, but you're doing your thing. But yeah, you don't want to forget your roots. You don't want to forget the fact that you want to be able to reach out and connect, but you also recognize that there are days where I like this, and you're like, do you feel burdened?
We're done. We just got the cutoff.
I guess it's wrap it up. Do you ever feel burdened that you always have to represent?
Yeah, but the permission to do that.
There's a permission to be yourself, or you have to represent, or just be, stuff like that. So I was just curious in terms of people's own personal stories.
I have a question for the audience as we walk out of the room, which is something maybe that I think about is like, what is it possible that we can, just language-wise, can we define the artistic production of people from outside of our own sort of time and space as being Black artistic production, or is it rather our projecting of our own gaze and how we see ourselves onto those people that we view that work as being Black aesthetic or Black artistic production? Because we mentioned all of these from the 18th century, from even before that. My answer to that question is, if I was thinking categorically, I might say no. Say if I come into, one of my favorite things to do to like white people is, I'll be like, yo, Norsemen weren't white. The construction of whiteness didn't exist yet. They were of a different race. Or like the people in Europe at that point, the races were Christian and Muslim. You know what I mean? Like, even our construction of race is different than these people. So like, I'm really particular about these things, and me personally, I don't believe in like a primordial Blackness. I think there's Africa's a big place, and I think for us, it's been very useful to fight white supremacy by building and creating this Black, politic and even ontology, right? Like have to find something that we can identify, beyond whatever construct that they built, or even like appropriating that from them and being like, this is not what you say it is, this is what we say it is. I think it's very useful, but also it's like, Yamamoto Yoji said something about clothing. We're going to jump to something completely different. And he was like, remember, you always have the key to your prison. And I'm like,
wow.
Okay.
Sure. I'd like to leave one thought with the audience also, and that is that as ancient as the earth is, and the people who have traveled across the Bering Straits to North America, the indigenous people, in their perspective,
if they were able, at that time, I'm not sure how they came up with this, but in their perspective of aerial view of North America, they called it Turtle Island. So from where we sit and view something becomes the information and our ability to see. Okay.